Good morning, Marine Corps. Hello, this is the Shadowfire Promotions podcast. Today is the 10th of November, 2014. It is the Marine Corps birthday. Marine Corps 239 years old, so a big shout out, a happy birthday to all my Marine brothers and sisters, no matter where you are across the world, no matter what reserve and what status you are, whether you're active duty, whether you're reserve, whether you're retired. As the previous commandant had said, you're all Marines still. There's no such thing as a former Marine unless you were dishonorably discharged. But there's no such thing as former. You are all Marines. You're just in a different duty station right now, whether you are, reserve, retired, what have you. Anyway, so we got Veterans Day coming up tomorrow, so a big shout out to all the veterans out there in the crowd as well. Once again, this is the Shadowfire Promotions podcast. Today is the 10th of November, 2014. My name is Greg Dennis. I am the president of Shadowfire Promotions Incorporated, your Chicago source for wrestling. www.sfpinchicago.com. That is SFP, like Shadowfire Promotions, inchicago.com. You can go directly to our podcast at sfpinchicago.com/podcast. .htm. If you have any thoughts about a podcast, feedback, stuff you want to go and talk about on the air, stuff that you don't want me to talk about in the air, sorry, John Cena, as long as he's top dog in WWE, no matter how many emails I get saying, don't talk about John Cena, sorry, already saying sorry, because he's going to get talked about. He's WWE's top dog, and until that changes and someone else is top dog, then we kind of don't really have much of a choice in that matter. Anyway, upwards and onwards. If you want to go and send any thoughts, feedback, stuff you want to talk about on the air, anything at all, send an email to podcast@sfpinchicago.com. Right? Podcast at sfpinchicago.com. All right, so we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about some birthdays in wrestling, some deaths in wrestling. Unfortunately, it happens. Just recently, Ox Baker, the legendary Ox Baker. Now, I know a lot of people throughout the word legend a lot. There's always feedback about who definitely deserves to be called a legend and who doesn't. And I definitely agree with a lot of people that the phrase, the word, the name legend is thrown around just way, way, way too much in wrestling. It seems that if you hang around for 20 years, if you manage to live, you'll be a legend. If you don't manage to live, you're definitely a legend. But I think Ox Baker is definitely one of the most memorable face with a big bald head and the huge bushy mustache and everything. I think he's definitely a face people would remember. He died just recently, I believe like the 20th of October, of complications related to a heart attack. My information is that he was not in good health over the last several years, and this would definitely reflect that. So we lost Ox Baker. If you look on YouTube, there's a great clip of Ox, real name Douglas Baker, on The Price is Right. I would guess probably either the early 80s, maybe the mid-70s, but probably closer to the early 80s, judging from how Bob Barker looks. But Ox definitely is not the world's greatest wrestler, but he was a great talker. And as today, as in the modern day, if you're not the world's greatest ring technician, as long as you can talk bodies into an arena, that's what counts. In the movie Beyond the Mat, Jim Ross had made the famous comment, as long as there's an ass, every 18 inches, I'm a happy camper. And that is true then, it's true today, it's always been true. The wrestling business has always been about putting butts in seats. So it doesn't matter whether you can do it by what you do in the ring or what you do on the mic, as long as bodies are in that arena. And also, with Ox Baker, his catchphrase, I like to hurt people. There was a movie, I think it was 81 if memory serves, I Like to Hurt People, kind of a cult classic among wrestlers. It's kind of a pseudo-documentary. It's more about the original Sheik from Detroit than it is about Ox, but it has a lot to do with the Detroit territory and the travels of the Sheik and some of the Sheik's matches and everything. It's not quite as campy. It's kind of a pseudo-documentary, so everything is kind of played straight. It's not so bad, actually. It's been a while, but I do have it available. We do have it available here. I'll have to go and pop it back in and, try to kind of do a memory refresher, but I wanted to get this out, so I wanted to record this, and I just didn't have another hour and a half that I could wait. Following Ox Baker on, I believe it was the 30th, was Bob Geigel. Bob Geigel is a former pro wrestler and a former wrestling promoter. He is a Navy veteran. He served in World War II. He promoted the Kansas City territory, and I'm going to explain territories in just a minute. He was the president of the National Wrestling Alliance for a good portion of the decade between the 70s and 80s. And he had passed from complications from Alzheimer's disease, and he was age 90. So he lived a pretty ripe old age. Who knows, if he didn't have Alzheimer's, he might have been able to live a little longer than that. But Bob Geigel, another one who was definitely fondly remembered in pro wrestling. And with the territories, let me explain for the people that are not as familiar. There's going to be a lot of acronyms you're going to hear on this, and there's going to be a lot of terms you might not be familiar with. And I try my best to break it all down and explain what I'm talking about so people, that the casual listener can understand and access it, just like on pretty much everything on the Shadowfire Promotions page, whether it be the Facebook, the Twitter, LinkedIn, any sort of writing, the message board, what have you. All those things really want to try and make sure that these terms are broken down so the average person can understand it. I think there's too many things where a lot of people write, whether it be in newspapers or anything else, they kind of write as if you already know certain things, and I'm not really a big fan of going and writing things or saying things where it's automatically assumed that the audience knows what you're talking about, because especially when you deal in vintage stuff, historical stuff, like a lot of what we do here at Shadowfire Promotions is, not everyone understands all the lingo, all the terminology, much like anything else. Whether it be business or other entertainment, actors might know a lot about blocking and that sort of thing, and runs and, reels and dailies, and the casual viewer is going to be like, what, huh? And they don't understand all that. So I want to try to make my stuff accessible to everyone, no matter what level of experience you have or what level of familiarity you have with the wrestling business, with mixed martial arts, with theater, with pretty much anything. So want to throw that out there, that we try to explain everything we use. But again, if there's something that you don't understand or would like elaborated on more, maybe devote a lot of time to it, you can always email us at podcast@sfpinchicago.com, and I will go and make sure that in a future episode I go and expand upon certain things. And that's why it's really important to keep sending feedback and thoughts and suggestions and everything. There's always plenty of stuff to talk about, some more timely than others, but there's always time to go and explain something, to more elaborate on something, anything you want, because if I just wanted to hear myself talk, I don't need to go and put this up online. This podcast is because you people on Facebook and Twitter and privately and over the phone had said to me, hey, this is a good idea. Why don't you do it? Jericho does his, Steve Austin does his. Everyone's got a podcast. You're not just repeating the same things that they are. You're talking about all kinds of different things, and it'd be kind of cool to do it. And I said, well, you know what? That's not a bad idea. So here we are. But with Bob Geigel and the territories and the National Wrestling Alliance, in the 1950s through the mid to late 1980s, the National Wrestling Alliance was kind of an oligopoly of several different regional promotions, regional wrestling companies, and it was broken down into each different region was called a territory, and each promoter was expected to stay in whatever little territory they had kind of carved out. So if you were the Chicago promoter and your area is Chicago and Milwaukee and maybe a part of, Indiana, well, you're expected to stay and just run shows there. If the person in the southern tip of Indiana, and that includes Indianapolis and, Highland, Indiana, and all this, he's expected to stay there, and we don't really talk to each other. We don't really acknowledge each other, other than the fact that we both kind of stay in our little walled fences of wrestling, so to speak. And that the territorial system worked really well for a long time. And the main benefit to the territories is twofold. One, if any other promoter tried to go and invade your territory that you had sliced out, the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, would make sure that everyone else, they said, okay, everyone, go get him. Send all your top talent over there and help this guy out. And they would do such, so you would, fend off the challenge. And so that was a big, big benefit of having NWA membership. And the other major benefit was being able to have matches with the NWA World Champion. And the president would determine who got the belt, where they went, pretty much champion gets his marching orders for where he gets to wrestle, and it was a big deal. And you wouldn't think about it now looking at the way WWE treats titles as if they're just, they're just there. But there was a time when having title matches was a big, big thing. And the NWA champion, more than any other federational champ, more than the World Wrestling Federation champion, more than any promotional champion, more than your territorial champion. You had your territorial champion, but the NWA champion, he's the top dog. And if you want to get a match with him, then it's guaranteed that any match with that guy is filling seats up. That was a huge, huge deal to get a match with the NWA World Champion. And the NWA champion at the time would literally travel all across the globe to every single member territory, make huge money wrestling their top guys, and then go somewhere else and help make someone else. And again, it would seem unlikely today, given the way that WWE treats its belts, the way they treat their champions, the way they're very selfish and saying, no, my champion can't appear anywhere else but our program. So it was a very different thing. The territorial system died off. It started to die off when different promoters had disputes either with each other or with a certain wrestler or with the NWA board itself, and they'd just separate. And they'd still obey the territorial laws because that was the one thing you just don't break. You just don't break that rule. But they'd go and do their own territory somewhere else, and they'd declare their own champion, and they'd say, here's the world champion. And it wasn't the NWA world champ, but he's a world champion. So you kind of had different things that would, put little chinks in the NWA armor over the years. Cable television was the other. It was another factor in things because people in different territories, if you lived in LA or something, you wouldn't hear what was going on in Florida or New York without a newsletter, some wrestling magazine, maybe the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines. You would have no idea what went on because you had your local television, and that would drive the arena business. And the wrestling business at that time was much more of an arena-driven business than it is today, where it's more of a television-based business. So your local TV show, hey, if you got good numbers, hey, that's great. But it was more about getting people to the show, get them to the arenas. That's where the money was, in the arenas. So again, very much the opposite of today. but cable television allowed people to see wrestlers like, for example, Jerry Lawler, who would be a hero in his home territory of Memphis and be a rule breaker everywhere else he went. And people got a chance to see wrestlers, their heroes, or sometimes their villainous heroes or anti-heroes, if you will, acting a different way in a different territory than they're used to seeing them. So that was kind of another factor. And in the early 1980s, when Vince McMahon, the current Vince McMahon, Vince Jr., Vincent K. McMahon, as opposed to his father, Vincent J. McMahon, when Vince took over the World Wrestling Federation from his father in the early 80s, he kind of had a vision that said, to hell with all this nonsense about territories. Now, I am not staying in one place. Why? What's in it for me? Ooh, the NWA champion, big deal. You know, I'm going to go and make my own champion bigger than anyone, and I'm going to run shows all over the place because I'm not limiting myself. And, you know, a lot of people thought that, yeah, who cares about Vince? Vince is going to spend himself out of business sooner or later. We'll just kind of sit in the sidelines, and we're going to wait for that to happen. And Vince would come in and cherry-pick a territory's best talents, show them on his television shows, get, you know, attention from your old champ. And even though the NWA was supposed to go and protect each other, when Vince came along, it was a screw you, every man for himself kind of thing. And that was one of the other biggest things in wrestling that kind of destroyed the territorial system. Would the territorial system have died off even if Vince didn't go and steamroll all over all the old territories and regional promoters? Probably. The way these people were, you know, Vince talked about it once. I believe it was on the Spectacular Legacy of the AWA DVD, where Vince talked about the regional promoters and the death of regional promoters. And he talked about how the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, which was run by Vern Gagne, and that's how the AWA formed as a whole show in and of itself, but would team with the remaining NWA member territories, and they would try to get together to put Vince out of business running their own super shows. And Vince kind of condescendingly said these guys couldn't even order a cup of coffee together, much less put on a show together. And as derogatory as that statement was, the truth of it is it was very accurate, because these guys have never teamed together. They never worked together. Wrestling promoters as a whole didn't really like each other all that much because they were all interested in their own thing. They all had kind of selfish goals, so they weren't really into promoting. And of course there'd be the necessary argument that happens anytime you get more than one wrestling promoter in a room, or even more than one wrestler, where they say, okay, who gets to go over? And if you've ever been in a room with wrestlers before where they're trying to decide who gets to go over, it's not a pretty sight. There's always going to be arguments of who gets to go over, why they get to go over, all this stuff. So needless to say, in the end, there was all sorts of infighting on who gets what, how much money gets distributed to where, and that pretty much ended the alliance of wrestling promoters working together, and the National Wrestling Alliance as a whole kind of limped along for a number of years with the former Jim Crockett territory, which consisted of like Georgia, Alabama, Virginia's, West Virginia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Ric Flair's, you know, region, a couple other states. Crockett had pretty much purchased up whatever territories were dying, and he would kind of buy them up and add them to his own territory, because with Jim Crockett as the NWA president at the time, and the last, or one of the last surviving regional territorial promoters, he was determined to fight as long as he could against Vince McMahon, and eventually, as history shows, that didn't succeed. The NWA was still a separate entity, whether Jim Crockett liked it or not, and they still had some degree of control over the title belt. And the NWA had decided to, when the NWA had Crockett had renamed his territory into World Championship Wrestling, WCW, related to the WCW that some people might remember. That, again, long and complex, so I'm going to try and do a very brief 2-minute history here, but the Crockett territory was renamed World Championship Wrestling after the TV show of the same name. That was their show, World Championship Wrestling, so he named the territory the same as promotion because he didn't want to be, the NWA. He didn't want to be Jim Crockett, Georgia Championship Wrestling. He didn't want to be Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. He needed to have a bigger name, something that more reflected what he was looking to do, and World Championship Wrestling was the thing. World Championship Wrestling was what he wanted to have as the name of his show. And in 1993, when they were still pre-taping a lot of things before the show, so you'd have weeks of wrestling taped to show live arena, so you'd be taping the TV shows in advance. And that word leaked out that Crockett was looking to put the NWA title belt on Ravishing Rick Rude. Rick Rude, great choice. Good worker, good talker, good build. Probably a great choice. Unfortunately, not that decision was not made with the consent of the NWA Board of Directors, so they quickly overturned that decision and said, not only is Rude not going to be the NWA champion, but World Championship Wrestling is not going to be an NWA territory anymore. We're stripping our recognition from all of your titles. And that, at that time, Crockett was whatever. He didn't care. Probably should have, but maybe not, because Crockett perhaps rightfully felt that there wasn't much that could be done with the NWA. The NWA was dying out, so it didn't really matter to him. And it probably shouldn't have at that time. But so the NWA, WCW went on and did her own thing. Rick Rude couldn't be the World Heavyweight Champion. They had that. They didn't have an NWA World Champion. So Rick Rude became the WCW International World Champion as a way, it was sort of a consolation prize for Rude because he couldn't be the NWA champion. Would Rude have been a great NWA champion? No doubt. I have the utmost faith that Rick Rude would have been a very good NWA World Champion had he been allowed to be the NWA World Champion. But, wrestling being wrestling, you just kind of go with the flow a lot of times. Sometimes you don't. A lot of people are under the mistaken notion that you're just a robot and whatever the booker says. There's a lot of give and take in wrestling, especially as you get further up the card. There's a lot of give and take, and you're saying, look, can I do something else? A lot of times you want to go and say, no, I don't want to do this. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But in any case, so, back to the original topic of Bob Geigel, he was a promoter, and he was the NWA president at the time, and which was during the 70s to the early 80s. And with the territorial system, the NWA continued even after they withdrew recognition from World Championship Wrestling. They still existed on a much, much smaller level than they ever did before at that time. And they kind of limped along for a while, and they had it in their head that they were going to go and take this upstart promotion, Eastern Championship Wrestling, and they were going to go and crown a new NWA champion. They were going to try and revive NWA, and Eastern Championship Wrestling was the place to do it. They had it in their minds that this would be the place to do it. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because the person who was going to be the NWA World Champion that night, as you might call it, he pulled a funny on the promoters because the booker that time was a person that if you've watched WWE TV, you might recognize his name. The booker, the matchmaker, if you will, for Eastern Championship Wrestling was a Paul Heyman. And Heyman wanted nothing to do with the NWA. He said it in the ECW, the Rise and Fall. The NWA was everything they wanted to. It was old school, old thought, old school. All these old promoters, they wanted the old way, and he wanted to do everything he could to get away from that. So the NWA still exists today. It still exists in much the same way as it did in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They still have members that are parts of many smaller independent territories. The modern wrestling scene and the modern independent wrestling scene, there is not really a way, there's not enough money in it to have promotions travel, so they don't travel. I mean, they don't travel anymore. You're in your one area. So I guess you're kind of in a territorial system, but you're more in a territorial system because you don't have a choice otherwise. You know, if you live in Chicago and you'd love to go to New York, but you just don't have the money to go to New York, well, you're not going to go to New York. If you live in Chicago and you want to go to Indiana, but you don't have the money, you're not going there. And that's what the modern day territories are kind of like. So Ox Baker and Bob Geigel, a long time. Definitely remembered, from what I understand, as one of the nicer guys that you'll meet in pro wrestling, well respected by his peers. Not a lot of film footage that I know of out there. Maybe if you look around YouTube, you can find some old stuff. And that brings me to the WWE Network. All of the footage that would have Bob Geigel on there, all of Ox Baker's footage, and Ox competed in the World Wrestling Federation, or the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, as it might have been called at the time that Ox competed. Vince McMahon's got that footage. It's there. It exists. I don't know why Vince refuses to show any of this stuff. It might not be something where you can go and say, I'm going to have an Ox Baker week or a Bob Geigel week. I know that Vince is kind of obsessed with the modern day and only attracting modern fans, but with the WWE Network and the reach that the WWE Network has, he really should be trying to attract as many people as he possibly can to subscribe to the network. Last I heard, I remember reading something where at the end of his third quarter conference call, they said that the network buys were somewhere in the neighborhood of 650,000 subscribers. I think that he wanted about 1 million, or he's looking for about 1 million as his break-even point, more or less. I remember something in my last podcast I talked about a hedge fund manager who said they need to probably have about 2 million before they actually started to make money with it. And right now, neither figure is looking very promising. I think that Vince might have had this notion that I'm just going to put the network out there and he hyped it good. I'm not going to say he didn't hype it well, but I thought, I mean, for what he has now, I think he was just expecting that, oh, if I put it out there, everyone's just going to subscribe and I'll have like 1 million buys tomorrow, maybe the next day. You know, but for certain, by the end of the week, there's no doubt that 1 million subscribers will be there because, I mean, this is the WWE Network. Who doesn't want to buy it? So I think he made that kind of mistake in thinking that right away he'd just have 1 million buys, and he's kind of discovering now that it's a little harder than he initially thought. And he's, from what I understand, he sent out a couple of surveys to the WWE Universe about what they want to see and what they like about the network and what they don't. I think that these are things he probably should have asked before the network was implemented, but I know that his 6-month commitment was something that chased a lot of people away, according to what I've seen from the reports on these polls that he's taken. This is all second-hand, third-hand, information, so I don't have access to any of these polls, but it wouldn't surprise me that some people were a little sketchy about having to commit for 6 months to the WWE Network. If you're talking solely pay-per-view buys, then yeah, the $60 you put in for 6 months, that is worlds better than the $54.95 a month you're paying per month for pay-per-view if you see 6 months worth of pay-per-views. Now what I'd want to see is how many people are buying a pay-per-view each month at $54.95. That's a lot of money to put out per month, on a pay-per-view, especially since the quality of WWE's pay-per-views haven't been all that great of recently. And a lot of the stuff that Vince has done really is beginning to smack of desperation. Just on a casual basis, it's beginning to smack of desperation. First, we're dropping a 6 months. Now we're offering Survivor Series for free. We're offering all of November for free. If you're already subscribing, we'll give you a free month tacked on at the end of your 6-month commitment or whatever. So it sounds like he's really desperate to get people onto that network. And I understand why, because he doesn't, as a publicly traded company, he cannot afford to fail with the network. And with Wall Street, and the thing about Wall Street is, I mentioned it before, I'm pretty sure, but Wall Street has this expectation that every single month your stock must rise, and every single month, we have to get dividends, and the minute that your stock drops in the slightest, or you show an underperformance than what was forecast, we're immediately dropping your stock like a hot potato. And it's unfortunate that they have that obsession, because that leads to what Vince is doing right now, which is slashing office jobs and cutting costs here and there, not putting Brock Lesnar on pay-per-view because he doesn't want to pay Brock Lesnar's appearance fee. It's not a matter of can he afford it, because of course he can. He can totally afford it. But he doesn't want to have to afford it because he doesn't want to have any other expenses than he has right now. So that's why all these office workers are getting fired, and all these costs are being cut, because he can't really afford to be seen as losing money. So something about, and it's interesting, I was thinking about it about a week or so ago, before this whole thing with this current podcast, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, gee, you know what? Vince McMahon's obsession with Wall Street and his catering to Wall Street reminds me a lot of World Championship Wrestling in the last several years that they existed. Whereas, he's so obsessed, oh my God, what does Wall Street think of me? I've got to be a businessman. I've got to be this. I've got to make sure that Wall Street respects me as a businessman. I can't be a wrestling promoter. I can't be a wrestling promoter. That's just for hicks and hillbillies. I'm a businessman. And it reminds me a little bit, Vince's attitude reminds me a little bit of Gene Simmons from KISS, where he wants to get all this respect as a businessman. He's got his line of clothing and his magazine, and they want to do the merchandising aspect. We're not a band, we're a brand. The comic books and all that. And it seems like Gene is desperately looking for that same kind of respect, that, I'm not just a guy who wears a lot of makeup and sticks his tongue out. I am a respected businessman with all these successful ventures. And, there was an article in Rolling Stone about Gene and Paul Stanley, and how the two of them get along or don't get along, and the differences between the two, where Paul was mainly interested in, enjoying his home life and his son and his marriage and all that, and Gene is always interested in showing off his office. If you've ever seen his reality show, the Gene Simmons Family Jewels, you'll see he's got his office and it's full of every single Kiss item that has ever been made. And Gene always likes to show that off and look how all this stuff. And Paul generally is like, yeah, I'm not really that impressed. It's not really my thing, you know. I know what I've done. I don't really need to show it off. So it shows the kind of dynamic between those two. But Vince and Gene Simmons are very similar in that regard because, you know, with Vince, every time that Vince wants that respect and wants to be a mainstream entertainment entity, he'll do something stupid. Whether it be he'll do a wrestling gimmick that's in bad taste, or he'll say something in the mainstream media, or, you know, he's had famous feuds with personalities, especially during the late 90s, where he's had clashes with different personalities. I talked to him about the direction that WWE was going before they became family-friendly, when they were more of what they called a PG-rated company. I called it more of an R-rated or PG-13 or something. But Gene is similar. Gene will say something that'll be completely out of context and disgusting or misogynist or something. And once again, he's a tongue-wagging, blood-spitting, fire-breathing bassist from Kiss. And it's like the old joke, I've donated millions of dollars to charity, but do they call me Bob the Philanthropist? No. I built thousands of bridges, but do they call me Bob the Bridge Builder? No. But you suck one little dick. And so it's kind of that thing where, and I think Vince gets frustrated by it, and I think that Gene Simmons is frustrated by it too. How they just can't seem to get that respect in the mainstream. So anyway, you know, so Vince is that same kind of obsession with Wall Street. It's like, what does Wall Street think of me? I have to make sure that Wall Street understands that I'm a legitimate mainstream business, and this isn't wrestling, this is entertainment. And with the WCW, the World Championship Wrestling obsession, where they'd have the monitors underneath the desks of their commentators so they could always make sure to see what WWE was doing, or the World Wrestling Federation at the time, see what they're doing. When do they go to a commercial? We got to make sure that we don't run a commercial at the same time, because it gives people an opportunity to check us out when the WWF is on a commercial. And, you know, let's go and talk trash about their tapings when we're doing stuff live. Let's leak all their plans. You know, this is war. What are they doing? Because we've got to copy it. If we do not copy every single idea they have, they're a success. So we're going to be a success by copying every idea they've ever had. And they were so obsessed with the WWS product that they weren't obsessed enough with their own product, which they should have been. And in the end, that's probably one of the major reasons, other than spending an insane amount of money on talent that probably didn't deserve it, but it's one of the major reasons why they ended up going out of business, because they were so obsessed with what someone else is doing instead of paying attention to their own core product. And I was talking with someone today about that same thing. You have to pay attention to your own product. You know, hype your own product everywhere you go. You have to, because no one else is going to do it for you. So Bill can say, oh, he's got to plug his own stuff again. Yeah, because you're not. So there's definitely an obsession with it. I'm not sure, you know, Vince is learning how hard it is to have a publicly traded company, but I think that he's turning off his fan base. He's turning off the WWE universe in his desperate desire to be this mainstream entertainment entity. And so, you know, whether it's for good or ill, I don't think it's for the good of the wrestling program, certainly. You know, I think its programming suffers. The WWE Network is definitely suffering, but the network is suffering for the same reasons that I mentioned in my previous podcast, where it has to do with content. I mentioned this a little earlier, too. Content is king if you have a channel, whether it be a cable channel, you know, YouTube channel, or the WWE Network. content is king. If you're not putting out content that people are interested in, then you're not going to get people to view your site, your channel, what have you. Right now, we've got Slam City, which was picked up by Nickelodeon, so we'll have episodes that aired there. You've got all these pay-per-views. You've got some of the documentaries and the historical stuff that they've run. Daniel Bryan, The Warrior. You've got all the WrestleMania rewinds and stuff like that. But it's not just a WWE thing. They should be concentrating on showing the people that are subscribed how much of its video library, they've absorbed all these video libraries, and how much original programming they can have, and how much classic vintage matches that people haven't seen in 30 or 40 or 50 years. Let's show a lot of stuff. Show how it differs. They could probably get a lot of people that would want to pony up some money for the WWE Network if they did more than just show a pay-per-view, as in the current pay-per-view. It doesn't matter whether it's Survivor Series or WrestleMania or Royal Rumble or Hell in a Cell or whatever. You're not really giving a whole lot of people on the network all that much content compared to the amount of video that Vince McMahon owns. And if he wasn't ready to have all this footage digitized for the network, then he probably should have waited to do the network until everything was ready. And if his thing is, I can't show you that because that's wrestling. That's not entertainment, that's wrestling. They don't want to see wrestling. No one wants to see that stuff. You want to see entertainment. You want to see this. And again, that brings me back to, man, that was a great sporting event, but, I wish I was entertained. That series between, the LA Lakers and Chicago Bulls, or the Jazz and Miami, the Miami Heat in Chicago, or the Blackhawks. Man, seeing the Blackhawks and the Kings, that last, the Stanley Cup Series, great sporting event, but it just wasn't very entertaining. I was not entertained. As an athletic event, it was a 10. But I wasn't entertained by it. It's like people that kind of watch NASCAR for the crashes. No one's going to watch NASCAR to see a bunch of cars make left turns. No one I know, at least. If you're the type of person that is excited to sit there all day and really gets into people making left turns, drop us a line, podcast at sfpinkchicago.com. Let me know. Hey, send me all your information on NASCAR. How long have you been a fan? What does it appeals to you about NASCAR? Hey, I'll talk about it later on. I'll talk about your opinion. Say, hey, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there are people that like to watch cars make left turns all day. But in any case, so it's kind of a silly argument that we're not a sport, we're entertainment. Sports have to be entertaining too. You're not going to get sports with these multi-million-dollar deals if they're not entertaining. And a good athletic event is going to be entertaining by the athleticism displayed, the action in the game. And wrestling can be that way too. Just because it's the results are predetermined of the matches doesn't mean that it can't be exciting. Seeing the ring work, the athleticism, the story that's told, all that stuff is all a part of what makes wrestling entertainment. It doesn't have to be entertainment to be entertainment. And WWE has a thing about doing entertainment for entertainment's sake. We're just going to do it because everyone else is doing it. And we're going to do stuff that no one else has done, but it's entertainment. We've had hologram Michael Jackson. We've had hologram Elvis. We'll do something like that. Does it have anything to do with the wrestling storyline? No, of course not. But it's entertainment. That's all you want to see. No one cares about the people in the ring. This is about entertainment. We want the announcers taking selfies and ignore the stuff in the ring. No one cares about that stuff. This is entertainment. And, some of the stuff they do, no one else does. And some of the stuff they do, no one else should be doing. No one else wants to do some of the things they're doing. But as a matter of the WWE weekly TV offerings, television and pay-per-view. Television doesn't equal pay-per-view, and it shouldn't equal pay-per-view. I know that WWE is desperate to have the highest-rated show on cable television of all times, and forevermore it's going to have higher ratings than it's a longer-running, weekly, episodic, non-serialized, throw in 10 other adjectives just to differentiate how your show is different. I don't know how many people actually care unless it's something that's spit out at the bottom of a press release about WWE. It's pro wrestling. Pro wrestling has always existed. It always will exist. How good it is a whole other story, but your TV shows should be of good quality. I'm not saying they should be crappy quality, but they shouldn't be pay-per-view quality, because TV is free. Pay-per-view is not. You want and you need to encourage people, in WWE's case, to spend $54.95 on a pay-per-view, or $10 a month for 6 months, or even $10 a month, period. You're not going to get them to do that if everything is the same as the pay-per-view. If you say, we're going to have John Cena versus Randy Orton, and we're going to show you this, for 6 months we're going to have them wrestle every Monday and every Friday. Monday Night Raw, they're going to wrestle. Then they're going to wrestle again on SmackDown. Then we're going to show a recap on Main Event, and we're going to do that every week for the next 2 months. But then, guess what we're going to do? As a pay-per-view main event, wait for it, John Cena versus Randy Orton. Yeah, so what if you've seen them like for the last 2.5 months? That's not important. We're putting them up on pay-per-view. Now give me your $55 and shut the hell up. And I think that's kind of the attitude that Vince has a lot of the time with how he puts on his shows. And it's his own fault, because he's not building up enough talent that he can have good matches and good television that means something and is going to still drive his pay-per-view business or his business to the network. And he needs to do that. So his TV should not be equaling his pay-per-view, especially in title matches. You know, the title matches should absolutely be reserved for pay-per-view. You just really shouldn't be having title matches on free TV. I mean, it should be a really, really, really rare occurrence if you do. But you got to say something for the paying customers. It's kind of like, you know, a website where it says, okay, here's our free section, here's our paid section. And if they say, look, our free is good, the paid section is even better, then you're going to encourage me and say, well, wow, you know, this is pretty good for free. I wonder what I get if I paid. But if your free section sucks and they say, well, yeah, we know our free stuff sucks, but that's why I want you to pay. I don't know about you, but I'd be saying, screw off. You're not going to get my money. If you can't even give me anything to encourage me other than, I want your money, I want your money, I want your money, and I'd be Comcast. Because Comcast says, hey, screw you, we don't care what you want, just give us your money. And I understand that you've been a loyal customer of Comcast for the past 6 or 7 years, and we appreciate that. That's why we're raising your rates, to tell you exactly how much we appreciate you. Now, this new guy that just signed up, we're going to give him 8 months for free. Well, we'll gouge him at the back end. We'll make sure that he's appropriately gouged later on. But it kind of seems like that a lot of the times, that Vince just automatically expects people to give him money for his pay-per-view and everything else. And he just expects you to kind of give him the money just because it's there. Not sure that's how it works. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. About another thing about their TV is, I know this was mentioned a while back, and every so often on the Facebook page we run a, you know, pet peeves of pro wrestling post, and it always is one of our more popular posts, and it gets all the people that haven't commented anything for the last, you know, 6 months or whatever, they're always there for that one. And one of the things that has been around for almost 20 years now is the rule-breaking authority figure. That has been around since late 1997 with the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series 97, when Vince McMahon pulled a funny on Bret Hart and rang the bell to have have Bret saying he submitted when he didn't. If you haven't seen Montreal, we have Survivor Series 97 available. We also have Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows, which is a documentary based on the events leading up to the Montreal Screwjob. Both are available from us. With the Hitman Hart documentary, we have the VHS version that comes with a booklet from Canada, and we also have the DVD version that has, it's a special 2-disc edition, this new version. It comes with the life and death of Owen Hart, and it also comes with some lobby posters, and these are the posters that were hanging up in theaters when this thing was originally shown in Canada. So we got those. So each DVD comes with 2 posters. It comes with a poster that is a replica of the original DVD cover art, case art, and a poster that's a replica of the 10th anniversary edition of the film. So both are available from us, all versions, the Canadian version with the booklet and the DVD with the posters. So, come and make an inquiry about that. You can go and ask about that by sending an email to orders, O-R-D-E-R-S, orders, like placing an order, at sfpinkchicago.com. So if you're interested in any merchandise, or you have a question about some merchandise that we have, or anything like that, pricing, anything, send an email to us at orders at sfpinkchicago.com. But I'm so sick of the evil authority figure, the McMahon family. We're such mean people. We're out to screw you. You fans don't know what you want. We hate you. Is this really the type of person that you want running the company? Yes, it's fiction. I understand. But when you're looking at it and you're sitting there and saying, we run the company, we're out to screw you, a lot of these investors don't understand that that's not the McMahon family. They look at that like, oh my gosh, that's real. They're horrible people. And in this whole vein of horrible people and out to screw you and out to get you, don't forget, while we're bullying you and beating you down and making you cry and showing you exactly who has the power here, don't forget our BI-Star anti-bullying campaign. And now that plugs out of the way for the BI-Star anti-bullying campaign, let's get back to the real business of bullying people here in the WWE, because bullying people is what we do best, other than putting a smile on people's faces everywhere. But we only do that in between bullying people. And I know that this post got a lot of attention when it was up there, that the whole anti-bullying campaign has got to be the world's biggest joke that there is in WWE, because WWE is always about bullying people. They bully the wrestlers all the time. Ever since we've had this whole evil Mr. McMahon, it's always been about bullying someone. So the notion of an anti-bullying campaign is laughable, just completely laughable. And it's really tiring. It seems like that the WWE doesn't really have any other way to tell a story other than having the McMahon family involved in it. It just seems old. It seems tired. Maybe it's just me, but it just seems tired. It seems lame. This has been going on since 1997, 1998. First it was screwing Stone Cold, then it was screwing someone else. Now it's the Authority, and we're here to go and screw Daniel Bryan, and we're going to screw everyone else who's, you're not with us, you're against us. It just seems very, very tired. It seems very worn out as a mode of storytelling. It needs to go. It really does. WWE and social media. There are ways to make money from social media. If you have paid advertisers, then absolutely you need to go and make sure you mention your social media and have people click on the advertising that's there. That's a great way of making money. But WWE has to understand that they can say, we've got the world's largest Twitter following. No one else has a bigger Twitter following than we do. But that's not really making them money. It's great to say, hey, we have all this social media. We've got it too here at Shadowfire Promotions. You can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/SFP Inc. Chicago. We've got Facebook, facebook.com/SFP Inc. Chicago. We got LinkedIn. You can look under LinkedIn under my name. We've got all of it. We've got a message board. We've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/SFP Inc. Chicago. So just like the website, SFP Inc. Chicago. But unless you've got a significant portion of revenue coming in from that, it doesn't matter that W is the most tweeted about program in cable history. I don't think it does. I don't think that the people they announce it to cares. I know that does the broadcast booth care about it? I don't know. I know I don't care about it. I could not possibly care any less that they were the most tweeted about program on cable. And they've got more people, following them. Unless these people are interacting with your social media, it's not really that important. So, again, they need to go and figure out what they want to do. And if they want to be a company that's more interested in having social media, that's fine. But I think their TV rights and their pay-per-view makes more money than they get from social media. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But speaking of announcers, this is something I noticed watching other sports programs, that when you have announcers, they all, whether they're Mike Goldberg or Joe Rogan on the UFC, whether it's someone on Monday Night Football or basketball, when the camera's on them and they're saying, well, Joe, and they're talking to someone, they're talking directly to that person. They're going to turn and face that person and acknowledge him. In WWE, it always seems like they're facing the camera all the time. Yes, Booker, that was a great segment. Well, they look straight into the camera. They completely ignore you. It looks fake. It looks really phony. It looks really overly scripted that they do that, because no one talks to someone else like that. You turn and acknowledge the person. It's very similar to the WWE's backstage segments, where WWE loves to have these backstage segments where everyone looks at the TV from a 90-degree angle. So instead of facing the television, you're faced off to the side. You're faced off to the side watching TV. Who watches TV like that? And what director would even say, yeah, this is a great shot. We want to see what's on the TV screen while you're watching it. But to make sure that we don't accidentally get you in the clip, stand to the side of the television and just kind of watch out of the corner of your eye. Because, as you well know, every time you watch TV, you always go and put your chair off to the side of the television to watch it. So that's another thing that WWE does that's just really, really stupid. Just no idea why they do that. I'm at a loss. I mean, it doesn't look natural. But as far as the broadcast booth, we really need Jim Ross back. Just listening to old tapes of Jim Ross on commentary and his Ross-isms, and by God, they've broken him in half, and it's Kane, it's the Undertaker's little brother, Kane, hellfire and brimstone. All of his Ross-isms, and he really had a passion for what he was calling there. My God, it's a rattlesnake. The rattlesnake has just stunned Mr. McMahon. That no good rattlesnake. He just really had a passion, and of course he understood exactly what to do to get people's blood pumping. Excitement. He wanted people to get excitement. He wanted them to share in the passion of the product that he was calling. And again, that's something that's sorely missing from current WWE announcing. So, in money/legal issues, Billy Jack Haynes. Billy Jack Haynes, a wrestler, he worked for WWE. He was a big star from the Portland territory in the late 70s, early 80s, and he worked for WWE, which was then the World Wrestling Federation. He worked for them in the late 80s, like 87, 88, right around that area. So right kind of just on the cusp of the early 90s. Big guy, real big jacked guy. And now he is suing WWE. He is filing a class action suit and for others similarly affected, and saying that they've all, him and the other people in the suit that end up joining that are similarly affected are all people who have taken bumps and gotten beat up and injured and all this stuff, all in the name of entertainment. But Vince McMahon should know, or should have known, that this type of thing would have caused injuries later on, whether it be brain damage or something else. And Vince McMahon's reply was, well, traumatic brain injury and all these other conditions, chronic, I forget what the term is, chronic encephalitis and all this stuff, it wasn't really even diagnosed until just a few years ago, so you couldn't possibly have it. And that's like, yeah, well, cancer wasn't diagnosed at one point, but people could still get it. It's like, hey, flu, you can't affect me if you're not diagnosed. Go and get a diagnosis, then go, That's silly. That's really silly, because you can have something even if it's not diagnosed. So chronic traumatic encephalitis, just because it hasn't been diagnosed, doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. And whether it's ill timing or not on the part of Billy Jack Haynes, there is a point with that. And that is that the NFL is beginning to be sued for the very same thing, saying that you should know that playing football and being tackled and all that stuff, it should have known that this would cause an injury. It should know that this type of thing could potentially cause brain damage later on down the line. So Vince, though, is always quick to point out, well, he's not under contract now, and he's only under contract for like a year. So look, even if you're not under contract, I mean, you might have potentially been under contract at one point, but you couldn't have possibly gotten injured because that was years ago. You're not currently under contract. You're not injured. Because only people that are currently under a WWE contract have the legal and moral and professional obligation to get injured. If you're not under contract, you do not have a right to be injured. So keep that in mind. If you're not in WWE and you're not under a contract, you don't have the right to be injured. So if you want to sue them, just always remember that you're not under contract, so you can't possibly be hurt. And what you did for them, even if it was done 20 years ago, well, that's fine, but that's 20 years ago. You can't possibly be suffering effects now. I mean, no one suffers effects from things 20 years after, right? Wrong. A lot of the brain damage from this type of thing doesn't show up until much later in life. So with the NFL facing similar scrutiny, Vince McMahon should not be so quick to dismiss this kind of a thing, because he could end up paying a lot of money to all the former wrestlers that end up joining in the suit if it succeeds, and if the National Wrestling Alliance, the National Football League ends up paying big bucks to people. So just a thought there. But WWE is always quick to dismiss things. All right, we're on to catchphrases. Not all catchphrases, but Bo Dallas. Bo Dallas and his Bo Leave thing. Is it just me, or am I just really annoyed by that? It's corny, it's hokey, it will never, ever catch over. It will never get over as a catchphrase. I just can't believe it would ever get over as a catchphrase. I don't know, maybe it's just me. You think it'll catch over? Think it'll get over as a catchphrase? Think it's the best catchphrase there is? Was it the best catchphrase since before bread was sliced? Or maybe you think, yeah, you know what, that's stupid. It makes him, appear really dumb and hokey and corny, and it makes me lack faith in him as a top heel, a top antagonistic rule breaker. Whatever your thoughts are, send them to me. Podcast at sfpinchicago.com. Podcast at SFP, like Shadowfire Promotions, INC, Chicago.com. Send your thoughts to me one way or the other. We'll cover those thoughts later on. We'll go back and we'll say, hey, remember last week we talked about Bo Leave? Well, here's what I had to say. So I'm expecting, hate mail about Bo Dallas and NASCAR and all sorts of stuff. Hate mail towards me, that is. That's all right. I get plenty of hate mail as it is, so I'll put it in my folder marked hate mail. I get a lot of it. John Cena. There's a lot of people that just can't stand John Cena. I mean, I've never seen people despise anyone more than they have John Cena. I'm not sure why. I don't really have anything against John Cena. I don't know him as a person. As a character, I think he's very white bread, and his gear, his wrestling attire is nothing more than what Billy Kidman had wore 10 years ago. He's just with the jean shorts and the tennis shoes and everything. he doesn't really look like a top caliber athlete. He looks like a guy who's about to play a pickup game of basketball with Barack Obama. You know, he's a big, jacked guy, and I know that's what Vince looks for in his top wrestlers. You know, you got to be big, heavily muscled, and that. But, you know, I don't get John Cena. I understand he's their top merch seller. I still don't get the guy, but he's got to be doing something right because he's still on top. I know he's supposed to be a real easygoing, you know, easy to work with kind of guy. Maybe that's the reason why. I'm not quite sure. I know there's always going to be plenty of anti-Cena mail coming in. So if you're going to email us at podcast@sfpinchicago.com, then please do something more than John Cena sucks. Why does John Cena suck? Please say why. Is there a reason why John sucks? Is it because he's not very convincing as a wrestler? Is it because he wears gear like he's an independent wrestling and, you know, isn't a guy who makes millions of dollars a year? Is it because he can't wrestle? He doesn't know more moves than Hulk Hogan did? Hulk Hogan managed to get by with all 5 moves for his entire career. And he's the only guy I know of who managed to go and screw up a leg drop so badly that he's, you know, needs surgery on his tailbone because he dropped on his ass wrong. You know, out of all the people that I've ever seen that perform a leg drop, he seems to be the only person with a bad ass because of it. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But he's saying, oh, his spine is all messed up and it's because of the leg drop. Maybe so. I mean, Hogan never really was a world-class, you know, worker in terms of his technical abilities, but he never really dropped down to the mat a whole lot either. I mean, he wasn't exactly Mr. I'm on defense a lot. He was always the guy who was permanent offense. So I'm not so sure about that. But this isn't about Hogan. This is about John Cena. And the reason why I'm saying it's about John Cena is because I got one other thing to say about John Cena, and I promise we'll be done with Cena. So Cena's wanting to branch out and to make more movies. He's not looking to reduce his WWE schedule or retire from wrestling or anything like that. He's going to have to reduce his WWE schedule if he wants to make a movie because it's going to be awful hard to wrestle and make a film at the same time. I know that in wrestling it's like the unwritten law that, oh my gosh, I can't take time off. That's like, oh my gosh, that's such a sin to take time off. And of course, promoters love that because they work you like a dog and then they shoot you in the head, you know, take out like a horse that's going to be made into glue when they're done with you. So I know that's like the big deal there, but he's going to end up taking time off whether he likes it or not just by the nature of making movies. But he wants to make movies outside of WWE studios, and the movie that he makes outside of WWE studios, he wants them to be movies that aren't action films. He's kind of expressed the opinion that, oh, they see me as, you know, the cowboy in the white hat and action hero star. They see that every week in the ring, and I want to be something different. I want to, you know, have different roles so people can see me in a different light than they do television. My initial thought is John Cena doesn't really do that well at portraying the guy in the white hat. I find him very boring in the ring. I find him very bland personality-wise, so maybe he'd be better off trying to play an action hero, maybe trying to perfect that role, but Hulk Hogan never managed to perfect that role either, so, you know, I guess he's in good company. I don't think if you've ever seen, you know, The Marine or 10 Rounds or 12 Rounds, whatever the hell that movie was, you can buy it from us if you like. We do have it available. But John Cena's not a good actor. I don't think he's that great a wrestler, but he's definitely not that good an actor. His movies are horrible. So if he's looking to branch out, I think the first thing he needs to do before he branches out into other roles other than action hero is I think he needs to get some acting lessons first so someone can tell him, John, you suck. But in the report that I read, he was crediting Dwayne, as in The Rock, and how Dwayne kind of paved the path for all these guys to find, and then credited Batista for his role in Guardians of the Galaxy and saying, see, we're such, you know, multi-talented guys here. Well, yeah, he's talking about 2 guys out of a batch of however many others, you know, that failed in acting because they suck. and we'll see how good Batista is in movies once he's doing something else other than Guardians. But, you know, I find it amusing that it's the complete 180 from his feud with The Rock at WrestleMania and Survivor Series 2 years ago when they were feuding because, oh yeah, while you were out making movies in Hollywood, Dwayne, I was here in WWE. You know, I was wrestling. I was here in front of the WWE Universe, and you were off making movies. So now we're singing a different tune, John. You know, before you hated Dwayne, and, you know, you're probably jealous that The Rock, you know, gets to make all these movies, and you're here in front of the WWE Universe and hoping to get a cheap pop, very Mick Foley-esque cheap pop from that. And now you're going on that same route. So, okay, whatever. But I definitely think that John Cena needs some acting legends, or acting lessons, rather. I'm sorry, looking at the wrong portion of my notes here. So, we're going to go on a happier note. We've got a couple of birthdays early on in November. We have Bobby the Brain Heenan and Edge, former WWE champion Edge. I think he was definitely a WWF, or World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champion. Edge definitely rose up through the ranks, you know, first in tag teams, and was kind of the innovator with the Dudley Boys and the Hardy Boys, the tables, ladders, and chairs match, taking 3 individual matches that have been around for a while and combining them into one, and giving us a pay-per-view that we would get, you know, had the concept milked into the ground forevermore. That's something that Total Nonstop Action does, is they take concepts and just milk them into the ground and make sure they're not just, you know, killed, but they're stomped, stabbed, burned, revived, killed again, stomped, stabbed, killed, you know, burned, scattered. You know, you'd think with the concepts they had, you'd think it was a vampire the way they needed to kill it, and, you know, chop off his head and stuff garlic in his mouth and all that stuff. And Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, TNA, has got a lot of work to do if they want to find themselves a cable home in the next month. Because the reality is their TV deal expires in January, expires at the beginning of the year. If they want to survive, it's been proven that you cannot survive as a live show only. You need television. Even in the 70s with the territory, you just needed a television show to drive arena business. You cannot solely be a pay-per-view business. You cannot solely be a live show business. That's what independent wrestling is. And even when the local independent show has a television spot locally, they still don't do that great a business. So if they're looking to do that, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in pro wrestling the next year, because Ring of Honor could conceivably be the next thing to move up into the number 2 spot in pro wrestling. And speaking of Ring of Honor, while we're on the plugs for merchandise, I've got some classic vintage Ring of Honor from some of the early years. Lots of titles. I got about 100 discs here. So if you want to go and are interested, I got some that are factory sealed, some that are previewed. But if you're interested in some Ring of Honor, shoot me a line and I'll shoot you a list of titles I have. Orders at sfpinchicago.com if you have questions about any orders, placing an order, merchandise I have in stock, anything like that. That's the email address you go to. If there's comments, complaints, suggestions, anything about this podcast, you can go and email podcast at sfpinchicago.com. sfpinchicago.com, that is SFP like Shadowfire Promotions, INCchicago.com. Podcast at and orders at. So we're going to move on a little bit to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, mixed martial arts, the UFC, the King of the Hill in mixed martial arts. You know, it seems like when George St. Pierre had vacated his championship and said he wanted to take a hiatus, you know, the big question is, how is the UFC going to survive without GSP, George St. Pierre? But the UFC seems to be rebounding quite well. You know, everyone had said, oh my gosh, you know, how are they going to survive without one of their most recognizable faces in George St. Pierre? But he seems to be getting better. He seems to be healing. I don't know if there's a return on the horizon for him to the UFC. I think he's 35, so he's getting up there in age for a guy who gets his face punched in for a living. But then again, Randy Couture is fighting at 40, and George St. Pierre is a great athlete as well, so there's probably no reason why George can't go and, do a couple more fights, especially if he takes some time off in between to just kind of rest and relax and heal up. And I think this current sabbatical is exactly what he needs. So, I think that that'd be a great place for GSP to be in, to be healing right now and take his time and all that stuff. So, but in the meantime, like I say, the Ultimate Fighting Championship seems to be doing just fine without him. So, that's terrific. So something that's never been done in pro wrestling, well, it has been done, but not in an official sense, is the notion of an interim belt. We had the interim heavyweight champion and the interim middleweight champion, all these interim belts. If a champion goes down, and then they'll have an interim belt. So instead of stripping the reigning champion of the title, they go and instead create this interim belt, and that way people can challenge for the interim belt, and it's still the interim title, but when the champion gets back, the Ultimate Fighting Championship can make huge money in a match between the interim champion and the reigning champion, and see who gets, in wrestling we'd say who gets both titles, but it isn't really both titles in the UFC. It's more just the undisputed championship. WWE several years ago did an undisputed championship. They did an undisputed championship not long ago, but they never really explored the concept of the interim championship. They did a couple of phony championships where there's been a championship in dispute. They did it with the Intercontinental belt, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels, and some other great matches like that. So, but they never really had an interim title. And it's a great idea from a marketing standpoint for the UFC. Terrific idea for them, because they make just a lot of money off of that interim title when your champion comes back. So I guess the big question would be, could pro wrestling do that same idea to make money? When your title holder goes down, whether it's a real injury or worked injury, and then say, well, okay, we're not, instead of stripping the champion for not defending his title in the mandatory 30 days, instead we're going to go, because the injury wasn't his fault, because some evil rule breaker went and did something that caused him to be injured, it's obviously not his fault, so we're going to go and create an interim championship, and then when the wrestler comes back, we're going to have a match between the interim champion and the reigning heavyweight champion for the undisputed championship. So could that idea make some money in pro wrestling? Email me your thoughts on that. Podcast at sfpinchicago.com. That's podcast at sfpinchicago.com. SFP like Shadowfire Promotions. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is currently a part-time champion in World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. He is their heavyweight championship, and he's the part-time champion because he only works part-time. And WWE seems to be not terribly interested in hyping the fact that Brock only works part-time. They keep Brock alive in the minds of the fans through his mouthpiece, Paul Heyman, but they could probably do a lot more and, have the fan favorites be coming out and saying, if I'm champion, at least I'll be a fighting champion, unlike Brock, where he's going and sitting at home and you come out here each week and talk about him. At least I'll fight for the belt. I'll take on all comers, and they could have a series of promos where they say, well, Brock doesn't need to come out because he's already beaten all the best people. But WWE doesn't seem really very interested in hyping up Brock for anything. And the prevailing theory is that WWE doesn't want to hype Brock because they don't like Brock. Why don't they like Brock? Because Brock did the ultimate sin. He left WWE and made more money somewhere else. And in Vince land, that is just an incredible sin to ever leave him. I mean, you should be Vince for life. Always be with Vince and stay there until you're broken down, and then stay there longer and be a road agent or a producer, but always be loyal until death. When you die, it's the only time you'll be released from a WWE contract, but you should be grateful to Vince forevermore. And there's nothing that gets Vince McMahon's goat than going and being able to make money somewhere other than him. That's definitely something where Vince hates when someone can make more money elsewhere and become a bigger star elsewhere. And there's no doubt that Brock's UFC fame is definitely, at least partially, a result of his WWE fame. Would Brock have been pushed up the card so fast in the Ultimate Fighting Championship if he did not first become a world champion professional wrestler? This is a source of a lot of debate, because a lot of people say, oh, there's no way Brock would have been pushed to the moon the way he was in the UFC if he wasn't in WWE first. And there's other people that said, hey, Brock was a champion wrestler, an NCAA champion wrestler, long before he ever got into pro wrestling. He's always been an athlete, and he wanted all this stuff. So I think that for Brock, and definitely the UFC at the time that Brock went in was kind of suffering for top stars. They're not, every so often they kind of suffer a little bit of a dearth on top of the card, and I think that the time Brock went in, it was kind of a combination of things. It was a combination of the UFC being low on star power, so it was the right place, right time. But on the other hand, I think that with Brock, he definitely proved himself. So it wasn't he just walked in and got a title shot. I think he definitely proved himself with what he could do. And Brock's always been very competitive, very athletic. You look at some of his old pictures, he's always been real huge. He's always been kind of a real, I don't want to say ferocious, but he's always been a big, athlete, a big, intense athlete. So, and the way he left the UFC with his intestinal condition, diverticulitis, he had a very poor fight against Cain Velasquez, and then Alistair Overeem later on at UFC 141. So he suffered those two back-to-back losses, and especially with the last two, it was very clear that his intestinal condition was causing him a lot of problems in this fight. And a lot of people have asked, is Brock fully healed now? Could it be that Brock could come back to the UFC? I think that the way Brock left, I think that if he was going to come back, he's definitely left a few things unfinished over there. I have no doubt that he'd love to have rematches with Velasquez and Alistair Overeem. I know that Overeem at least had some issues with failing a drug test shortly after his match with Brock. I don't think it made a real difference at that point to Brock, but if Brock is well enough to go and do wrestling, maybe whenever his contract expires, there's potential for a UFC return, and it'd be very interesting to see that happen. I'd like to see it. I think the UFC can make a lot of money with it. I'm not sure if it'd happen, but, I'd be very interested in it, and seeing it happen. So right now, as we get towards the end of the year, in early January is the next time we're going to see the UFC Women's Championship defended. Ronda Rousey will be back. I believe it's early January, like January 15 or something, right around that area. I know that January is looking to be, they've already had the Ultimate Fighter with the straw weights, an all-women's Ultimate Fighter, And that's a huge thing for Dana White, the president of the UFC, because he had once said he would never have women in the UFC, in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So that's very telling. And I'd like to see more competition with the women fighters. A friend of mine from high school had spent some time in mixed martial arts. She only had a couple of fights before she retired. But I'm always interested in seeing top-level athletes, and it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman, as long as it's a good fight. And I definitely thought that Ronda Rousey's last fight was spectacular. You know, everyone is always looking for Ronda to do the arm bar, and then she did something completely different. And I think that's what, you know, she has to do if she wants to continue her undefeated streak in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. She needs to make people think that she's armbar, 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 only an armbar, and then surprise someone by pulling something else out of a bag of tricks. And I think that's Ronda's strategy. But definitely going to be a very interesting time in the new year with mixed martial arts. And again, I would love to see someone like Brock come back. I heard that Tito Ortiz failed a drug test not terribly long ago. I'm surprised that Tito was still fighting, but, you know, Tito has apparently matured a lot more than he used to be. And if you really want to see some real cool stuff, we've got some early stuff from the Ultimate Fighting Championship UFC 1. We've got the set of the original 23 from SEG Sports and Entertainment. We got that on VHS. We've got some Pride DVDs. We've got some King of the Cage DVDs, some multi-disc sets. So you're definitely going to be spending, you know, if you want to spend a weekend watching nothing but fights, hey, some of these sets are the way to do it. So you want to email orders at sfpinchicago.com to see what stuff we have out there, what stuff we have available. And we hope for 2015 to have the site up. We've got a lot of stuff. We probably have, you know, some 10,000 different items, and to get it all sorted and organized properly in a way that's easiest to find, it takes a little bit of time to do it. And we, you know, there's been some times when we didn't pay as much attention to our own site as we could have, but we're definitely hoping to change that and definitely change kind of some of the stuff we do, not only with this podcast, but also with the website and the message board and everything else that we have. So look for some cool new stuff. We hope to have, we're in some negotiations right now for some interesting stuff that we hope to be issuing a press release on real soon. In terms of merchandise, some stuff we want to plug right here. It's time for the plugs. The Ultimate Fighting Championship, you know, I talked a little bit earlier about getting some early Ring of Honor, some stuff with CM Punk. Definitely CM Punk's on there. The DVD I just watched the other day had Punk on there. A lot of old factory sealed DVDs from Ring of Honor. We've got an 8-disc 100 UFC 100 Greatest Fights. It's an 8-disc set, and what makes this set kind of cool and different from saying, oh, I can get this anywhere, is we've got a promotional poster that we'll go and put with the set that we'll give to you. And I really hope that, I mean, we're certainly willing to mail it. We'll mail it anywhere in the world. But I really hope that whoever buys this set buys it locally, so we don't have to go and fold the poster or risk the poster getting kind of mangled in U.S. mail, because you know, even with insurance is not always included with an order. We'll only include it at extra cost and at your request, so the two kind of go hand in hand. But I really hope that nothing would ever happen, so I'm really looking to see if that can be sold to someone locally, but we'll see. And the UFC is really kind of interesting, because neither WWE nor the Ultimate Fighting Championship really do a lot to hype their DVD releases. WWE right now is all about the network, which is understandable. And the UFC doesn't really hype their DVDs. But the thing is that the UFC doesn't really need to hype their DVDs that much, because they do so much money on pay-per-view. And it's kind of funny that once Vince McMahon had talked about what the WWE Network would be, and he kind of made some remark about pay-per-view as a dying industry. And I think that Dana White and the UFC would beg to differ, because they do just fine on pay-per-view. They do great, and their live shows at the MGM Grand, all their live shows draw really, really well. The crowd is always really into the fights, so that's always a big thing. And speaking of the UFC, besides that 8-disc Ultimate 100 Greatest Fights with the promo poster for the UFC Undisputed 3 video game, I want to go and give a plug to Kimberly Cormican, or KD Cormican, as she's known as professionally. She's a writer. She wrote a book, real good book. It's called Whatever Makes You Blind. It's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And she's in the middle of another book right now. And the reason I want to talk about this other book that's in progress is because there have been some rumors, and I have not seen a manuscript yet, so I can't comment. Maybe she'll be nice to me if she hears this podcast, and she'll send me something. I don't know. Authors are kind of funny like that about letting people see works in progress. But she's a real sweetheart, and maybe she'll be nice if I beg and give me a manuscript. But this next book is supposed to have... It's sort of like a Hunger Games sort of a theme where people are fighting for survival, but it's sort of a Christians versus the Lions kind of, aspect to it. So there's supposed to be some UFC-style, mixed martial arts-style fights in the book, and my understanding of it is that's kind of a central theme is mixed martial arts fights. So if you go on Amazon.com and you look up KD Cormican, KD like KD Lang, not like Katie Heigl, and Cormican, and look up the title of her book, Whatever Makes You Blind. Go and pick it up. Good book. About 225 pages. Easy reading. Weekend reading, bus reading, train reading. Take the train into work. One other thing that we got here is the Hitman Heart. I mentioned earlier we have the Hitman Heart DVD. It's a 2-disc DVD set. One is the remastered documentary of Wrestling with Shadows, some comments from the filmmaker, Paul J. The second disc is called The Life and Death of Owen Hart, and, we've got these lobby posters, these great lobby posters that come with the set. So every DVD you get 2 posters, so you get a 2 DVD set and 2 posters that go with it. And the one poster is the box art from the first Wrestling with Shadows DVD, and the second poster is an image of the box art, the case art, from the Wrestling with Shadows 10th Anniversary Edition. So we are the only one that has these posters. We got these posters, and they're limited release, and we're the only ones that have them. So we may consider at some other point to have the posters separate, but for now, the only way to get these posters is if you pick up a Hitman Heart DVD set. So make sure you go and drop a line to orders@sfpinkchicago.com. That is sfpinkchicago.com. Orders at, like Shadowfire Promotions, orders@sfpinkchicago.com. My good buddy Nick Wautier and his company, Wautier Entertainment. Nick is probably a very, very big help in this podcast. He's given input on where to put this podcast once it's done, where to upload it to get maximum attention. He's going to go and help me create an RSS feed and get this in iTunes. And Nick, if you're listening, email me. Don't make me call you. I know that you got a lot of stuff on your plate, but get back to me. I need to hear from you about that RSS feed so I can get that all taken care of. With about 3 or 4 weeks of podcast in the can, it's time to get this thing in the iTunes store, huh? And, mind you, with some of these plugs, these are just, members of the family. These are close friends. These are people that I've had, certain success with. So, these are not paid sponsors. So I'm not getting any money for this. So if you want to go and be a sponsor and chuck some money my way, podcast@sfpinkchicago.com. Let me know. Shoot me a line. I'm always willing to take your money for something. And, we'll talk about sponsorship opportunities. I'm hoping, like I said, to put out a press release soon. There's some really cool stuff going on behind the scenes, but I don't want to go and leak it too early until we get all the I's crossed and T's dotted, if you will. But I'd also like to give a shout-out to Cairo One The Loop, chiropractor, Dr. Edward Gurevich. Again, he is someone I've had some good success with. The people that know me know I've been an athlete. I do a lot of running. I do a lot of other stuff. And I've been in the Marine Corps, and all that stuff has kind of taken a toll on my back and my knees. And, you know, humping a pack up a hill isn't exactly the world's greatest thing for your knees. A lot of stuff and a lot of wear and tear on my body. And my body was kind of breaking down up until last year when I finally saw a chiropractor. And he really helped me out a lot, probably added about, you know, another 10 or so years on to my athletic career, where I was previously going to have to retire just because my body was starting to break down. So definitely check out Chiro 1 of the Loop 2. That is Loop 2, like in Roman numeral 2. You go to Chiro1.net, you look up Illinois, look up Chiro 1 of the Loop 2, look for Dr. Edward Gurevich, Dr. Ed. Look him up, tell him you came from Shadowfire Promotions, tell him you came from Greg Dennis. You know, he'll hook you up, he'll do good by you. He's helped me out a lot, and I know that wrestlers and fighters, you know, these guys are landing on their backs and they're getting their necks screwed up and all this stuff, and you know, definitely they need to you know, get some help, you know, help out when their necks and backs are hurting. So, you know, I know a lot of people don't always look at a chiropractor as a doctor, but, you know, they got the same MD at the end of their name, and they've done a lot of good stuff for me. So hopefully if you're a wrestler or a fighter and you're listening to this and you've got some old aches and pains, doesn't necessarily have to be in your neck or your back, but since, you know, the spine is kind of the nerve center of everything, there's probably not a lot of things that your spine doesn't somewhere connect to, you know, in terms of all your bodily functions. So, and Chiro 1 offices are all over, and I know they're all over the Midwest. I'm not sure if they're worldwide, but, you know, you can definitely out Chiro1.net and check them out. And, you know, if you're local, you can check out Chiro 1 of the Loop 2, Dr. Ed, and hopefully he can help you with a lot of stuff. So that's it for today. We've gone almost an hour and 45 minutes here, which has probably been my longest one so far, but there's just been a lot to talk about going on, deaths, births, all sorts of other cool stuff, podcast, the SFP brand, and there's definitely going to be some more cool stuff to talk about as time goes on. You know, and certainly your feedback when you send it to podcast at sfpchicago.com is going to be, you know, definitely mentioned in future editions as well. But that's it for now. To my Marines out there, happy Marine Corps birthday. To all the veterans out there, early happy Veterans Day tomorrow. I know on behalf of Shadowfire Promotions, we appreciate all your service, peacetime, wartime, reserve, active duty, former. It doesn't matter. We appreciate it all. On behalf of myself and everyone at Shadowfire and the SFP brand, all of our affiliates, all of our partners, all of our various different things, your service is very much appreciated. I'll make sure to go out a little later on tonight when I'm done with work here and have a drink for you guys. And thank you for downloading, sharing, talking about this podcast, sending in your feedback about this podcast, everything you do. I've had a lot of people send me mail saying, wow, this is really cool, this is great stuff. Maybe I'll set up a feedback section about it soon. I'll talk to my web designer and kind of see maybe I can sneak it in somewhere. Or maybe you want to go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/SFP Inc. Chicago. Maybe you want to go to sfpinkchicago.com/boards and check out our message board, and maybe you want to put a comment there. But in any case, thank you for everyone who's given their feedback, who's suggested this idea, whose merchandise I'm plugging, everyone who shared it, downloaded it, you know, said they enjoyed it. It's very much appreciated. I appreciate all of you for giving me the opportunity to do this and to yak at you for half an hour. And I'll see you in about another week or so. Thanks a lot.